Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Brexit means Brexit.
On day one of the new parliament in December, we will start getting our new deal through so we get Brexit done.
I was proud to back Brexit, proud to back Leave.
So, three former Prime Ministers, Theresa May, Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson, they're expressing strong opinions about the UK's future outside of the European Union. So Brexit means Brexit, but what does Brexit mean for a Labour government? Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Stephen Carroll.
And I'm Yuan. Welcome to the programme. So Keir Starmer is in Brussels today on a mission to reset relations with the European Union. You could say the UK treats the EU a bit like a faulty appliance, given the number of times it's tried to turn it off and turn it on again. We've heard...
Is that how you fix things?
Well, yeah, it is. Doesn't always work, though. That's the only problem. We've heard endlessly about the PM's desire for a better relationship with Europe. But now I think the hard reality of negotiation is starting to come clear.
Yeah, look, the UK is going into this meeting with the list of things that it wants to achieve. Closer cooperation on defence, just one of them as well. A relaxation of checks on foods, for example. But there are things that Brussels wants in return. For example, a youth mobility pact and more reassurances over citizens' rights as well. None of these areas are going to be terribly comfortable for Keir Starmer either.
No, and I think if you plot UK-EU relations in a Bloomberg chart, I'm surprised no one's done this.
Our favourite thing to do, yeah.
Then we'd be some way off the record lows of the Boris Johnson days. Remember Ursula von der Leyen calling Sunak Dear Rishi and the Windsor Framework 18 months ago. Clear signs of a warming in relations. But mood music aside, I think real progress is going to be a really hard slog.
Yeah, let's bring in our managing editor for European Economy and Government, Ben Sills, for more on this. Ben, we spoke to Michel Barnier over a year ago now, of course, now the French Prime Minister, but when we asked him about the relationships between the European Union and the UK, he felt that things had already pretty dramatically improved from the days of Boris Johnson. What sort of reception is Keir Starmer likely to get in Brussels?
I think it's going to be a warm reception, but not too warm. The Europeans are obviously delighted that they don't have to deal with Johnson anymore. And, you know, for them, as you say, Sunak was a major improvement because Johnson had just made kind of that EU bashing such a fundamental part of his political operation. It was like the kind of first or second option in any kind of off-the-cuff speech, and there were a lot of those. So things have already got better during the Sunak times, but the disarray of the Sunak government, I was going to say late period Sunak government, but to be honest, from start to finish, it was pretty chaotic. But you know, the problems that Sunak had made him quite a difficult person to do any real business with because he couldn't get things done. Starmer's in a much stronger position, obviously, and he's kind of like inherently amenable to EU matters. But I think the difficulty will be the actual concrete steps are tricky. And trying to work out how to rebuild the relationship, where to focus on rebuilding efforts, particularly within like the political constraints that Starmer faces, because he doesn't want to go anywhere near the actual Brexit question again, but also the constraints that the Europeans face. You know, Germany, France, they're in a total mess. The EU doesn't have a whole load of bandwidth for dealing with the UK at the moment. I think that's probably going to be the biggest limiting factor.
Is this meeting really all about the vibes? Because as you say, the detail of stuff is tricky, isn't it? It's difficult.
Yeah, and I do think that if you look at it from Starmer's point of view, I think that he needs to go slowly and just establish that he can go to Brussels, he can have a photo opportunity with von der Leyen and come back to the UK without triggering a load of kind of Brexit sellout headlines from the right-wing press. And therefore, you know, I think you're right. It is largely about mood music, but I think mood music matters because if he can establish that, that gives him a bit more space to look at compromises on the substance. And you know, the thing about Starmer and indeed von der Leyen now, who's, you know, what looks set to be confirmed for a second term, they can afford to think about this, for the long term. They've both got a full term stretching out ahead of them, and Starmer, although he's probably not looking that far, could reasonably expect to perhaps secure a second term as well, given the size of his majority.
Yes, they have a bit of time to try and figure things out. On the concrete fronts, I mentioned a couple of the things that the UK wants, easier checks on food, for example. Where might we see progress? Where do we think there could be the idea that actually things might concretely change in the relationship?
Yeah, I think it's those kind of nitty-gritty, slightly boring but important details that offer the most possibility in the short term, both because they're probably not going to be generating a lot of headlines, and that's to Starmer's advantage. But they also will make a meaningful difference for people who are trying to negotiate the trading relationship between the UK and the EU on the front lines. So I think the UK proposals on security and veterinary deals, we heard from the EU side that they seem doable. They were looking for a little bit more detail. If detail is what they want, that seems like the sort of thing that you could, quite productively discuss at today's meetings and lay out perhaps a roadmap for how to advance towards some kind of agreement.
There's a lot going on in Europe as ever, isn't there? An unpopular government in Germany, a new French government which is grappling with an outsized budget deficit. With all that stuff going on, do you think there's much appetite for, discussing things with the UK? Does anybody care over there?
I think that it's definitely true that the UK torched vast amounts of goodwill over the past, 8 years since the Brexit vote. However, the two fundamental challenges, Mario Draghi would say existential challenges, that the EU faces at the moment are on competitiveness and on security. You can have a debate about how much the UK could contribute on competitiveness, but on security, the UK defence industry, the UK remains one of the major military powers in Europe. And I think both sides are aware that the seriousness of the Russian threat at this point in time is such that they don't really have the luxury of politicking over this issue, and that the UK and the European militaries can and probably should be looking at ways to deepen their cooperation and work together in order to produce a serious deterrent for the Russians.
Ben, you can't cover European politics for as long as you have without becoming a meeting expert, a meetingologist probably in EU language it would probably be called. What's the significance of UK ministers getting to attend EU meetings, which according to our reporting is one of the things that we're expecting to come out of this trip to Brussels?
You're dead right that there's a lot of kind of criminology that goes into this, and the issue of who appears in the photo, who gets on the minutes, matters, because it's a signal to that whole policy-making apparatus of who's included, who's on the inside, who's on the outside, and it's again. It's symbolic, but it's important symbolism that this dialogue is happening, and both sides are signalling their willingness to work together and actually do things.
And what about the timeline going forward? We don't expect any, major announcements from this week's meetings, but have we got any idea of when some actual stuff might be negotiated? Brussels tends to move quite slowly, doesn't it?
We're waiting for this new commission to be confirmed. The hearings aren't expected to start until November next month now. Beyond that, I don't think it's really a priority. I would imagine this is going to be a kind of secondary issue that will perhaps chug along in the background for a little while. But, once the new commissioners take up their mandates, it's something that we'll be following and waiting for them to pop up with some developments.
One of the things that Labour said no to quite early on in the government was this deal to allow young people from the EU to come and work in the UK and vice versa. Do we have any idea why Labour seems opposed to this? Because it's something that on the EU side they definitely want.
What we were hearing in London was that the UK are just a little bit leery of anything that might inflate the migration figures. That's been such a massive issue for the last government, and it remains a massive issue for voters. It's something that Starmer has promised to address, and therefore they're just a little bit cautious of anything that could make the numbers go in the wrong way. I mean, having said that, the idea of having a bunch of 20-something European students come over to work or to study in the UK is pretty different from having asylum seekers arriving on boats. And you would hope that as the government becomes a bit more comfortable and beds in, they might be ready to flex a bit on that. But that's what we're hearing at the moment.
Ben, really good to get your thoughts. That's Ben Sills, our managing editor for European Economy and Government. So I think lots of warm words and nice photo shoots this week, but lots of difficult things to negotiate and all sorts of things that the UK really doesn't want to give ground on.
Yeah, and indeed, getting to the negotiation point is going to be the difficult one as well. And then there'll be a question, that will these negotiations be as arduous and difficult as the Brexit negotiations are, and that'll be very difficult to tell until we get the exact outline of what they're going to negotiate over. We have a couple of ideas of the issues of interest to both sides, but they have to sign up, and then you have to get basically 27 countries on one side to agree to the same negotiating framework as well, which was something that was very difficult to do for the Brexit negotiations. So start of a long road, I think, on this issue. That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe, give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiu Adebayo, and our audio engineer was Sean Gostamakia. I'm Yuan Potts.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.